Hello, everyone. Here we are. I'm together with Samuel and Nicolas today.
Hi, everyone.
And in less than a minute, you will see the next update for Duel Commander. In my opinion, or so far, I think it's the biggest update in 2026. A bit comparable to an update that we had about a year ago, which was also pretty big, with 4 commanders unbanned and a card in the 99 with Asmo and Ezio and whatsoever. And today we will have 3 cards unbanned and 3 cards especially unbanned from the commander side. There will be Winota, Najeela, and Emry playable in the command zone again. All of those 3, or most of them, I'm pretty excited about. Really cool changes. And yeah, we will jump right in talking about the first one, which is Winota. An interesting decision, from my opinion, coming from 2 angles here. The first one is back then when Winota was banned, I think the card haven't had crazy results. Like, it was not bringing up crazy tournament results. It had some finishes every now and then, but it was not too oppressive. Nonetheless, at some point it was banned, and I think the reason why it was banned was rather the randomness the card or the ability brings to the board. You know, some kind of unpredictability, because whenever it triggers, you don't really know what can be found in the next 6 or 12, 18 cards. And that's something that I personally find a bit concerning. We have always tried to monitor these cards. I think the latest ban in that direction we had was Invert Polarity. The card was banned for good reason. There are also other cards like the Comet Stellar Pup and Maddening Hex and Krark and things like this on the ban list. What is your stance on this? Is the aim to release Winota to make aggro playable again? Might Winota be a better Yoshi version after all? Because with Tarsigo and Spiderman, we see a decline in aggressive decks. So what was the thought behind that, Nicolas? Maybe you can give us some thoughts on that.
I think when Winota was banned was not only because of the random aspect of the deck, but also because of his power. It was like often you play Winota on turn 4 or even on turn 3 or sometimes ahead on the curve, and you attack and you put too much pressure on the board and you win the game. Like Winota, it's a card that you need a removal when the card enters the battlefield. And at this time, the removal play was not always like instant removal and was also pretty if you're removal, we played Council Judgment, Vindicate, or a card like this. And right now, these cards are not played because Wizard, we have new cards to play, like Erode or something like this. Lastly, Solitude, other card like this that doesn't exist at this time, was less played. And so right now, having a 4-drop in the command zone is less a problem than at this time, because the format accelerates, the speed of the format increase.
Yeah.
And so for the random aspect of the deck, yeah, it still exists, but I think it was not the current important things about the card. And we can, like this card, we can't attack it, be it with removal on Winota or removal with on his previous creature. So it's two way to attack the deck. So I think it's less strong than at the time before. And yeah, for why we want to unban this card is because a lot of people we heard a lot of people that tell us that aggro deck is like less played and who can less be played because it's harder to build this kind of deck, and with people complain about Spiderman that makes this kind of deck unplayable. I'm not agree with that, but we want to help aggro players. So the unban of Winota, this is a goal of unban Winota right now.
Okay.
Giving some fresh air to aggro player.
Interesting. Yeah, overall I would say I agree to your points. As you said, back then, removal suit was way less efficient than it is these days in terms of mana spent and also what the removals do. These days, having a CMC4 commander really comes with a cost. And yeah, the deck needs proper setup in order to work. That's something that, in comparison to Yoshi, for Yoshi, that's not the case. Yoshi will always start with the dog, or in 95% of the cases, it will start with the dog. From that point on, it will try to scale. And here it's very different. I think the most interesting aspect of unbanning Winota is the deck building, because finding the right humans might be easy, more or less. Finding the right non-humans is not so easy, I think, because there are lots of cards that could be considered depending on the abilities that they bring to the game. And that's something that I would be curious about, to see how the deck building develops, and maybe we get to a point at which the card is not crazy but played every now and then, and it's scoring results. So I think this is always the most optimal case, right? For any of those unbans, you make your thoughts about whether or not this card could be fine again in the current metagame, and then it shows to be all right. It has its appearance, but nothing too crazy. Some of those previous unbans were more or less never present, because some of those cards were just, it didn't make a lot of sense to have them on a ban list. For example, Ezio. But you already expected Ezio to not be played that much. I think it's not the case for Winota here. Samuel, do you have any additional thoughts on Winota?
Yeah, I think one I've heard the concerns, and I feel like they make sense as well. That aggro is not that big of a part of the format at the moment. Especially considering like the premier aggro deck, which I would think is Yoshi, simply because that's the deck that's the most focused on not really interacting that much with the opponent, not comboing, and just doing its thing, doing as much damage as possible. And that has kind of not that much presence at the moment, and it's a difficult deck to approach the format with, because a lot of decks are either just interact way too much, just kill everything you play, or present a combo line that's faster than what you can do. And one of the issues, or one of the thoughts, would have been maybe like unbanning some typical aggro cards, maybe something like a Price of Progress, but that is not something that actually helps the aggro archetype. That slots much more into a deck like Spiderman. And I feel like giving the aggro archetype some support with Winota is a better way to go than to make the 99 stronger. So we'll see how it plays out. I don't expect the deck to be crazy strong, because 4 drops, as we see with the current play rate of like Aragorn, like these mid-rangey 4 drops, an Aragorn or a Deadpool, they're not that present, they're not that good, but I feel like Winota can occupy a slot of, you play a really good set of 1 to 3 drops, and then you curve out at 4 with your Winota and just put lots of bodies on the board, and that wins you the game. I feel like that's a good way to go at it, and like in in quotations, a fair way to attack, to present a combat step. Yeah.
So, something I think it's interesting also with Winota is like the work on the deck building, because compared to Yoshima, you need to have legendaries. With Winota, you have to have like 50 or 45 creature. It's mandatory if you want to that your deck works, and that means that you add less interaction because you need to have all this creature to make your command zone working. And you need to find a creature that have spell effects like Brutal Catar, Flage, Character Apparition, and card like this. So I think it will be very interesting to find the good creature to put in the deck, and that needs to be a creature that will be interact with the opponent, and that can be like a Death and Taxes creature or a removal creature. And I think it's really interesting this kind of build and the dynamics of the game with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Cool. All right.
That
Let's go
takes
over
us
to the
over
second one. Yeah.
Yeah, to the next Commander Unban, we have Najeela, a deck that Felix played quite a bit when it was still legal. And a deck that kind of, while it was being played, occupied a similar slot to Ezio before it was banned. A sort of 5-color control deck that has a card in the command zone that can win you the game over a couple of combat steps. And I think this is the 5-color control deck is a deck that we have seen present in the format in many different forms. I think the latest forms have been the Spiderman, the 5-color Spiderman pile. And yeah, it occupies an interesting spot in the format. What made you think, okay, we are ready for Najeela again? Do you think it's not strong enough to really take over or really be a good deck in the format, or do you think it'll be a player?
One thing interesting about Najeela is that I saw the Duel Command MTG Top 8 page of the deck, and there is only 15 player who performed on a tournament with that deck, so it's really low. And this 15 player, it's like on a period of 1 year, of June to June 18 to May 19. So it's a pretty long period, but not a lot of people that perform with the deck, and even this player don't perform a lot with that. So it's interesting to know why at this time the card was banned. Also, same thing that with Winota. Okay, it's a 3-drop, and when the 3-drop attacks, or if you already have a riot that attacks, the 3-drop will make something. But it's a 3/2. It's killed by any removal in the format, and the removal that played right now, it's instant removal is better removal at this time. So I think the card is like, if the card can be really important and put a lot of pressure before, I think right now it will be okay. Also, we had Ezio, like you said, 1 year ago, and yeah, Ezio was a big deck of the format that a lot of people like, and people love in Duel Commander. Some people love to play like their 5-color all banned cards deck. They love it, and they can play all their dual land in black border dual lands, and they love to see how much I have money. And we know that, like, it's people in Duel Commander like to play their old cards and their strong card. And if this archetype can be dominant sometimes, most of the time that was a bit like tier 2 deck and pushed by some players, because there is a problem of consistency of the deck and of having a real plan. with Najeela, we offer a plan that can help this archetype because we want to play warrior and we will attack with Najeela, but a big board and that put pressure like this. So there is a plan that exists, but also that can be a 5-star deck with like Ezio, just the best card and the best interaction of the format. So, but the difference between the two decks, that's like one of the cards, it's 3/2 for 2 mana that kill you when you have less than 10 life. And the other card, it's like a 3/2 for 3 mana, so 1 more mana. And that have a combo that exists here in the with the card, but a combo that needs to you untap with a sword or Fist of Famine attached to Najeela. So you will spend like 5 mana and your commander needs to deal damage to your opponent. So I think it's okay in the format that if a player can assemble the 2 card, that the player can win the game. So I think right now Najeela will not be a problem in the format, but can open like nice push a new archetype, and that's good.
Yeah, I think once we get to a spot in which we have 10 Ajanis available, you know, being a warrior itself, I think, but at least bringing down a cat warrior, this is the type of prince that we should be scared of. Fortunately, there's only one so far. And if you have a look at the tribal or the warrior tribe itself, the quality is not too crazy. There are a couple of good ones, but just because you mentioned it earlier, Samuel, I played the tribal version back then and it was doing pretty good. But I don't know, 5 years ago, whenever the card was banned, it was, I think, even I think 8 years or something. It was much different. The metagame looked completely different, and effects like this were much better. And also, you know, having cheap commanders that would bring additional value. It had an entire, like, a completely different evaluation than it has today. One thing I'd like to mention, Samuel and me are always completely hating on cut down. This is another card that dies to cut down, which already tells a lot. But yeah, no, as you said, Nicholas, there are a bunch of removals that deal with Najeela. We are playing Magic in a Spiderman era. Spiderman plays lots of shocks and bolts and whatsoever. So tempo-wise, it's very easy to trade 3 for 1 mana here. And also, talking of the white matchups, you know, a Seam Rip or a Portable Hold did check Ezio. It does not check on Najeela. Nonetheless, there are many more effects that would get rid of her. And yeah, in order to make use of the trigger, you have to have some proper setup up front. I think going through the warriors and going through the lists that you just mentioned on top 8, there are a couple of things that you would probably include in the 99. There's one specific warrior that grants haste to all the warriors and stuff. If you are really aiming at playing the tribal version, then you would probably lean into that. But honestly, since the quality of warriors isn't that great in 2026, I would assume that players would rather go for another 5-color soup. But we might be wrong. Maybe there's someone finding something, and we have like a very spicy 5-color pile. At least it's not hard to beat 5-color Spider-Man and stuff like this. You know, those decks, in my opinion, are rather boring. Would be cool to see something more interesting. I think the recently most interesting card we had in that direction was the 5-color Elemental that granted Evoke to all the elementals in hand. I think it was like that.
Yeah, that's card for mana. I played this. I love this card.
Yeah, it's really cool, right? We want to have things like this, and ideally those things are a bit competitive, so you can bring them to like bigger tournaments and maybe score some results. Maybe Najeela goes in that direction, but I'm totally with you guys. It will definitely not overperform. I don't see a world for that.
So about the warrior version, one of the problem of the deck that's like before, the format was slower, and so if you can play like your 4-color 1-drop, because you had a black 1-drop, white, green, and red 1-drop, and it was not a big deal if you don't play in turn 1. But right now, in the format, if your mana base can play, if with your mana base you can play a 1-drop on your turn 1, it's like horrific. You will lose a game. And so, because if you want a lot of fire, you will need to have like all this card with a different color, and your mana base will be really bad. So it will be, I think, a problem for the wire version that make it less good than maybe the 5-color Banger version.
Yeah, I agree to that. Yeah, we will see how things develop. I hope for people to experiment with it, but it could also be that people say, well, they don't really feel the vibe here building, since people already know that the warrior tribe is not the best, and so they would probably not even try, because most people are not interested in 5-color mid-range things. It could make for a cool commander in that direction. We will see, as I said. I hope that it will have some appearance in an interesting way.
One thing is that the cards open an archetype that will be passed by the board, and that will be board something. It will be play more creature. So that's something cool for the format also. Even if not an aggro deck, it will be a mid-range proactive one that won't play the best threats. But will not, I think this deck will not play like 2-mana counter spell will be within this archetype.
Yeah.
So even if your plan is like playing Minskebu and Laelia before, it's like a proactive mid-range deck that want to attacks, and I think it's something that is good for the formats.
Yeah, totally. Maybe it will fall in a similar category as Breya did. Because we already talked about it, or you talked about it mainly, that you have to design your mana base wisely with those piles. And mostly you achieve that by cutting colors. And here you would probably, if you want to play dorks and you can't cut green, if not, you can maybe get rid of green and make like a Jeskai, Grixis, White Splash whatsoever thing. We will see. Breya,
If you go full warriors, you can go with the creature-only mana base. There is a lot of lands in that. Or like creature type only. There is a lot of lands in
you mean like
that
the
color that will provide you with an mana of any color untapped for warrior spells. But I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
that's a
It will help.
bit tough, especially because most of them don't. Like an ancient ziggurat can't be used to activate Najeela's ability, and I think that gets in the way a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Don't think that works too well.
Yeah, we will see. As I said, would be cool to see it around. Not very likely. Let's go over to, in my opinion, the most interesting Lurker of the Loch. No, we have Emry back. Emry is a card to, I would say, almost anyone with a very big exclamation mark, because when Tazio was unbanned, we had a rather big debate about cheating mana, cheating commander attacks. It does cheat mana and it does cheat commander attacks. Tazio already does it in a pretty good fashion. Here for Emry, we have Affinity written on a card, and I would assume by default, the way these decks will be designed, it will be super, super easy to cast Emry a couple of times along a game only by paying 1 or 2 mana. And this is something that back then the committee actually had like a closer look on, and they tried to not have commanders available that enable that. We have to be fair here. If you look back at the lists from, I don't know when Throne of Eldraine was released, let's say 2017, maybe even 2016. I think it was not 2016. I think 2017, 2018 might be accurate. Back then we had Moxes available. We had Lotus Petal, we had LED and stuff like this. So the combos around Emry were much, much better in comparison to today. We don't have any of the fast mana available anymore. In an artifact fashion, no Mox Opal, no Mox Amber whatsoever. So that's definitely a step towards unleashing Emry, I would say. But what was the general thought? Why would you, in the mid game, right now, why would you unban Emry? You know, what led to the thought that this card might be good, might be healthy? Also, keeping in mind that you once said that you always want to have, or you always go for a strategical goal when unbanning cards, right? So what have you had in mind?
Like, yeah, I know that the cats cheat with the command tags, but there is other cat that cheat with the command tags. Like, but we unbanned Tassigur like 2 months ago. No, more.
4 months,
Like
yeah.
4 months
January,
ago.
I think, yeah.
And yeah, and the cat, it's okay in the format. It's a good commander. That's like, it's a tier 1, but it's okay. There is other cat that cheat with the command tags, like Carado, but Carado, it's not played. That it's really legal. Just, it's not a problem by itself. Like, Eminence can be a problem, but it's not a problem by itself. It depends of what the card does besides this specificity. And for Emry, like you said, when it was legal, when it was banned, mostly, all the fast mana artifact was legal, like Mox Opal, Lotus Petal, and all that cards, like Mox Amber too. Right now, all these cards are banned because we think that, like, fast mana, we need to take care of this kind of cards. And Emry, it's like a good, it's a threat that's really fragile. That's it's a 1/2 for 1 mana, but it's only 1/2 that's all removal can kill it, and it's a 1/2 that will make some slow card advantage. It's a slow card advantage card that we can't play Bubble or Spellbomb or thing like this from graveyard. So I think it's really not too much pressure. Also, to make that advantage, Emry needs its graveyard, and right now the graveyard, it's like, you know that it's a resource important in the format that is attacked by most of the deck. Like, one of the tier 1 deck is Kintorius.
Yeah.
That they like 5 or 6 artifact that exiles the graveyard of the opponent.
Exactly.
And we think that it's a good time to let Emry come back. We want, like, the artifact player, like, want to ask us to play this archetype right now, and they ask us for so long time because they have Sai, and Sai is like vanished. It's not playable anymore.
Yeah, totally.
They were really happy with Lady Octopus, but no, it's too weak. Sure. So we had this possibility to unban Emry that open a totally new archetype, and I think a really interesting one. And so we want to try it, and we saw a bit some player test the list and give us some comeback about that, and show us what the deck looks like if it was legal right now. And yeah, it's the artifact deck with some combo, but the combo is really slow and can be interact. You need like 2 or 3 cards, and the 2-card combo, it's like Panther Servant and Grindstone. That's playing every artifact deck. And you can beat it with like one bolt. And for the other combo, is like Emry plus like Paradox Engine and another card. So yeah, if you can assemble your Emry that have haste or can go for still on the board 1 turn after, and you resolve like 5 mana artifact, I think it's okay if you win the game. Like for me, it's something that it's okay in the pace of the format right now, the Duel Commander right now.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not even sure if Paradox Engine makes a final cut. I know that I think the Lady Octopus decks played it. I think just from a very different perspective, I played some Oswald a couple of weeks or months ago even, and Oswald is also leaning into Paradox Engine combos, and this is quite clunky and needs lots of setup in order to work out. For Emry, it doesn't need that much. I think you would need your commander, you need a bauble and the engine on field, and then you would draw your entire deck in the opponent's upkeep if you want. And from that on, you can combo off next turn, maybe. I think
But if
there
you
is.
draw your deck, you can lose to the mill. But if you have like one artifact that makes mana, it's okay. But you need to play like this stone.
No, what I mean is
Make
like you just find the win con next turn because you draw almost your entire deck. There are some
Yeah.
combos with Zero Valence Cam, definitely, and Urza. Urza can create the mana. So there are some interesting combos for sure, but I totally agree to your point. I think most of those things are rather slow, and they need some setup. And usually what we want to have in the format are 2-card combos that directly go off with the commander. So then things like Devoted Druid and Swift, those are good combos, in combination with Bridget. If you need like 3 or 4 cards, that's rarely seen in the format because it's just too clunky, needs too much time, and most of those cards are also too fragile. So I would personally rather expect this deck to go in a Staxy direction, and that's what I think what Lady Octopus tried to occupy in the previous, or at least in the versions that I've seen. As you said, Lady Octopus itself also needs setup, needs time. The first cast with a couple of counters is maybe good. The second cast is already horrible. 3 mana, do nothing until counters are stacked is kind of, okay. You can do better stuff. Emry is definitely better here. But also, as you mentioned, there are so many decks these days that work together with the graveyard, using the graveyard as a second hand. And therefore, we have many, many things added in the 99 to go against that. We see so many mainboard ghost vacuums these days, right? It just became one of those, I need something against the graveyard staples. And as you mentioned, the elephant is graveyard hate deck and stuff. And we might have a couple of strategies that keep Emry in check. So coming from that perspective, I can totally get behind it.
And of this kind of thing, like this kind of view, Emry in the shell, like in prison deck, Emry it's like a Phyrexian Arena, or 0 mana, but you need to play the cards. So it's not that powerful. Also, okay, your opponent will be draw 2 cards by turn. If you don't kill Emry, but the card needs to survive, you have removal, and just like you draw 1 more card by turn. It's not that impactful. It's a engine that you can beat, in fact, and that's important to note too.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. We will see. I think the affinity pool increased quite a bit lately. We always get like new tools for that. And also, what I like about affinity is the fact that you have so many different options to sideboard, quote unquote, against various strategies, right? Because there are so many different abilities written on artifacts. For example, a friend of ours played Breya as an affinity deck when it was released last year. And there was a time in which Lumra was coming up and the Rogak Storm decks were still played. And at some point, he was boarding Damping Sphere because it was a pretty cool card for that situation. When you face a lot of Storm decks and you face a lot of Lance decks, then this deck, the card is pretty good. And that's something I really like that aspect of playing affinity. And we have we don't have a Storm deck right now in the format that is dominating or even a present one. I think there are some iterations with Dargo I've seen in a Grixis fashion and stuff.
Cool.
But nothing in comparison to the Rogrok era. But we have Lumra as a very dominant lands deck, and we still have some Azuzas every now and then. So yeah, I'm not advocating for a Damping Sphere, but you get my point. There are lots of cards to choose from, and that's something that I really like about this archetype.
It's
So,
like the creature combo deck or creature tutor deck. It's really cool that this kind of deck can tutor for like stack space, and the artifact decks would be with the artifact and the creature combo, or the creature tools deck would be with creatures. But it's so interesting, I think, and it's also when you play the game and that you have that many choice during the game. It's so cool to build your plant with your tutor piece, and you know that will be have this exact card that we can put on the battlefield, and that will be annoying the opponent. It's super interesting in the make of the game, I think.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will see. I think amongst those 3 cards, it will be the most tested, and it's probably the most serious contender for sure. Let's see if it has a serious impact. I don't think it's too crazy, but I think it could be powerful in the given or in a good shell. So let's all try to get together a nice shell, and then we have Affinity back in a format, which is, for diversity, it's a really cool thing to have.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it ends up. We've seen, we've talked about it, but we tried Krang on the channel, and that just wasn't quite the deck we were looking for in terms of the affinity pile, and I think Emry will give us a good show of that.
Yeah, but there's a lot of artifact that is I did like that goes by wizard or beyond that Bria for artifacting and does nothing. And it's a bit deception that the archetype don't exist, so we push it and decide to end on Emry. So
Yeah,
that's really, I think it's
interesting. That's a really cool thing, I guess, and I'm personally super excited about it. I will directly put a pile together, and I think many other players will do so too. But this is the change for today. So we have 3 new commanders to tinker with. We also have to talk about the elephant in the room, the card we did not talk about.
I think it deserves kind of like a status update. We have seen it still maintain its top spot in what's being played, and I think there's still quite a lot of people that don't like its presence in the format. What are your current thoughts on Spiderman 2099 and how it's positioned, and do you think was there talk about it? Yeah, just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, but we see that's the most played deck right now, and one of the deck that performs the best too. We know of that, but we speak about the deck a lot this last month with the core member and the original coordinator. And but for the core member, we think that the deck is not too powerful right now. It's I think this is a deck that is most played, but it's like all the in Duel Commander, each time each deck most played is often like blue red on a blue X tempo deck, because we know that player loves to play their DS, their Ponder, their Preordain, Galactis. They love this kind of deck. And like last year, we spoke a lot about Aragon, and everyone said, "Yeah, Aragon needs to be banned. It's too powerful for the format, and it's a problem." And we see right now, Aragon it's not really played. But it will be, I think, always this kind of deck that will be one of this kind of deck will be tier 1 in the format. And I think it's what the player wants, because before Argon it was Raffin too. And it's each time like this. I think we can go against the player, because if player wants to play their UX mid-range or tempo decks, but they will beat us. It's them that choose what they want to play. So it's hard to go against that. In other way, if a deck like this becomes too strong, we'll act. But right now, we don't think it's the case for Spiderman. And also, one of the things important is that Spiderman doesn't forbid people to play some kind of deck. I think like with Spiderman, the format, you still can play aggro deck. I myself play Yoshimaru during the last weekend. I think Asmo, it's a great deck in the format. I also test a deck like the double Ellie from Last of Us.
Yeah.
I think it's all decks that can challenge Spider-Man. Also, Spider-Man has a lot of bad matchup, and some matchup that go by the board, like a deck like Failure or Cloud. I think it's deck stats attacks correctly Spider-Man, and it's more slower mid-range, but it's like mid-range deck that wants to win by the board. Also, there is like Asigur in the format that is one of the best deck, and I think he has also a good matchup against Spider-Man. Last month, we have the start of Kintorius too. Kintorius, it's the elephant in the room also.
Good one.
That just go out and take important plates in the format, and have also a good matchup against the Spider-Man, because you don't really care about the combo aspect of Spider-Man, because he play too much removal and don't lose on his moon effect. So the two unfair plant of Spider-Man is not a problem, really a problem for Kintorius. So we saw that also. And the other thing that we need to think, it's like before the ban of Storm in last January, a lot of player complaints about combo in the format, and yeah, it was not funny to be killed turn 2 or turn 3 with a lot of dragons. There is also Lumra in the format at start, and Lumra was really strong deck, and it was important to give tools to other decks to fight against this kind of archetype, because it's a combo in Duel Commander. It's really strong, and it's hard to find a good balance, because it's often like maybe a bit too strong or too low, and so it's very hard to keep this kind of deck in good balance. And right now, with Spider-Man and Tassigur, we have two decks that attacks correctly the combo deck of the format, and I think it's important to keep this kind of deck in check with that. So that's some reason that make us don't ban Spider-Man 99 right now, and we unban new cards, so the metagame can evolve, and let's just see what's happened. And also there is the other reason, it's there is a lot of big tournament that comes in June and July. But there is a tournament in Prague. There is the French Championship, the China Championship too, and so there is a lot of big event. And there is a new big set that goes out too with Marvel, and it's a set with a lot of legendary cards, so a lot of cards for our format.
Yeah, true.
It's hard to make a so big change with like killing the tier 1 deck, and because if we kill Spider-Man, maybe we need to kill also Tasigur and Lumra. So yeah, it's hard to kill like all the heads that was up in the format. Just before so important set and so important events. So we decide to not ban Spiderman for this time, but we unban other cards, and we hope that with the unbans plus the new card that will go out, people can have fun and people can attack the format and makes metagame evolve. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think there was a long enough explanation for why Spider-Man is still around. Fairly reasonable. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that, Samuel. I think we talked in and out about the card and what are the pros and cons, leaving it in the format and or accepting it.
Yeah, I think if you look through the previous ban updates that our talks that we've had, we've talked about Spider-Man a lot. I think the opinion is always shifting. I feel like how do I say this? The printing of cards like Quintorius, which I feel has a pretty reasonable matchup against Spider-Man. I'm not sure. I haven't played it yet, but that's my kind of theory crafting to it. I don't know what it's actually like, but I would say that it has an okay matchup against Spider-Man, and we're seeing many new commanders, and every set brings a couple more, and the chance that we will see something that just overtakes Spider-Man is not that it's not that low, and I feel like in the grand scheme of things, the Izzet color pairing is very popular, and there are a lot of players that really just want to play that color pairing, and that also affects how much the deck is played and how many results it puts up. And that kind of yeah, in my mind it's like, okay, well, this is just the way it is. And decks that want to compete in the format have to have some plan against Spider-Man, and there's always going to be a most played deck, and the most played deck is always going to attract more people than other decks. So it's a kind of self-enforcing and reinforcing mechanism that is always going to kind of mean, well, there's a top deck in the format, and that top deck is going to be played by a lot of people, and you just have to sort of accept that. That's my kind of state around it now, and I feel like that's just the
And I
way it
think it's
is.
something that happened a lot more with MTG02, because there is a lot of players that just want to play a league or like play a trial to win like a set or coupons with MTGO, and we just choose the best deck of the format and play it because it's just net deck and it's okay. So I think online there is this experience that is more important than in paper. In paper, people have are more invested in the format. They will make more tests. They like more build their own deck too, and I say beat the meta. And so I think it's something that is more present right now than before too. And it's okay. It's we need to take that in care, and knowing that the format evolve and what the format will become. And that's one of the reasons that we'll be more cautious about banning like last year's. I think it's the first year of working that is more unbans than bans. Just because we want to make the things we know that some cards that were not important, like that will be useless in the ban is like a cat like Ruffalo's. We know that we take no risk by banning it, and we try to do that. And we still work about other cat that is on the ban list and to know which cat that can come back, because it's important to us it's an important key for us to let format evolve on a one way, and be cautious with return bans allows us that there is a lot of new set that goes out like every month or every 2 months, and with powerful card that comes not only with a standard one but also with commander deck. We saw by Fortune Guard, but a card like this that impacts our format or the legacy one. And it's important that the format stay powered or have some power to take this card in the format, because if we ban a lot of things when there is a broadside bombardier that comes in a format, it's just broken, and we don't want that can happen, and we need to be okay with the fire theory of wizard that wizard had, and with like the power levels increase, and we need to keep that in mind and keep a format that and goes with that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Fair enough, exactly. Yeah, I think everything has been said regarding Spider-Man. I have one last card / topic that I want to touch briefly. It's an interesting topic to me, and Samuel was also a bit confused. So we did like a poll on our channel a couple of days ago, just asking for what people would expect, whether it's unbans, bans, or no change. And many people actually put in the comments why City of Traitors would not be banned by now. And this is something to me, I don't know, maybe it occurred in another subgroup of the format, I have no idea. I wouldn't say it's the very first time I hear that, but to me it seems kind of weird that it appears all of a sudden. It might have to do with Quintorius. Then again, I personally also play the Elephant, and I think City isn't the best land over there because you usually want to stick to your land drops. Might be because of that pool, might also be because of Lumra, but I personally don't think that's like a big problem. However, there's some part of the community that seems to think that this land is problematic. So I thought let's ask Nicolas on your thoughts about this card.
I think it's really interesting about this card because we know that we ban a lot of fast mana lately, like with Dark Duel, with Lotus Petal, Moxopal, all that card. But there is still some cards in the format, like City of Traitors, Goblin or Elvish Paid Guide, and card like this. What's interesting with City of Traitor or Crystal Vein, that's some fast mana that they use in bicolor deck or monocolor decks. So playing a monocolor or bicolor deck, it's like a disadvantage in the Duel Commander because you have access to less cards than the other people. And this disadvantage can be limits with because you play a better command zone or you have access to colorless lands. And for City of Traitors, it's one of the benefits to play a monocolor deck. Also, what is interesting with City of Traitors is it will be not used in a deck that needs a lot of mana to work. So it's a burst of mana that will be used mostly in decks that can play with less mana, and it's a card that will be give you a burst of 2 mana for 1 or 2 turns, and it's deck like Claude. It's really interesting of the play pattern. I think it's a play pattern that is interesting because Claude can play with less mana, with you have a low curve with some interaction and a small creature. But this burst of mana can allows you to equip your creature, play the equipment, equip the creature directly, and give you a great tempo advantage. Also, in Lumra, it's so strong because you can bring back your City of Traitors. So
Yeah,
but
that's right.
and for Quintorius, it's because you have your Quintorius, and if you have your Quintorius and your engine besides, you will win the game. And playing your Quintorius against a mid-range deck like turn 3 will really you make win the game. But even if you will be it will be harder to cast it after, because Quintorius takes about so easily that you'll have like 1/3 to protect it, and when it's too fast in the game, it's really hard to beat that. But one of the defaults of City of Traitor is that when you, it's what one of strong of the commander in the format is that when you play it, you can play it 2 turns after. With City of Traitor, you can do that because you lost your land. And it's the biggest default of the card in the format. But when we already said that, I think it's a card that is really powerful. And we talk a bit about the card before the last update, but we decide that right now it's not a problem. But it can be, it can become a problem in the further months. We don't know. It's something that we keep an eye on it. It's Shari.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
As we ban like Dark Ritual. It's like
While talking about it, I had one more question came up, which is might be a little bit too big for now, but if you want to answer it, then you're welcome to. When Timetwister got banned.
sorry. I forget to say a thing about City of Traitor. Sorry to interrupt you. One thing is important also in Duel Commander, it's before the threats was less good, and so the fast mana was less a problem too, because if you play like Silver Angel on turn 3, it will not be a problem. There is less chance that will be a problem. But when the trades become better, like a Minskebu, like a Clitorius, or something like this, is something that we need to take care. That's why Dark Ritual was banned, because it was like a TV on turn 4, or a combo at Traxa, or Dreamworks at Traxa, or Deadpool, something like this. And so when the power becomes greater, we need to take care about the thing that can be allows us to play it faster. It's important to take care about that. So sorry to interrupt you about.
No, you're totally fine. Totally fine. So my question is, when Timetwister got banned, the reason for Timetwister getting banned was mostly financial. It was not really seeing play in any deck, and the only deck that it did see play in was Urza, who got banned in the same ban announcement. So that problem was already solved when the card got banned. And of course, different committee, but yeah. And I think financial was the biggest reason for the card to get banned. And we saw a couple of years later, we saw a similar banning with Bazaar of Baghdad. And City of Traitors is a card that, especially with the pre-modern push for around the card now, and some other formats that like to play the card. I'm looking right now, a good card, like a good one in good in English. For me to buy one, I already have one, but for me to buy one would cost 430 euros. Is that a price that kind of gets in that prohibitive range that you would consider? As are cards like Candelabra in that range? There's still like, do those thoughts still exist, or are there still any considerations towards those sorts of decisions in the committee at the moment?
I think like Timetwister was 10 times more than City of Traitors.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And also there is not only the price, but also the capacity to find the card. on the lawn, on the land, or to buy it. It's also a problem because if like Bazaar of Baghdad will be the card to play in Duel Commander, there is like right now 100 in sale or something like this. I don't find the number, but there is not a lot of that is sold, and it's impossible to find. And,
You mean
for-
time twisters right now, or what?
Oh, Bazaar of Baghdad.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Bazaar, there is like
Bazaar is
50.
very, very rare. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
there's 93 listed on MKM at the moment.
Okay. And
So not many.
Timetwister, I don't know, but I guess there is not a lot of Timetwister too. Maybe a bit more. Oh, yeah.
And
So
Bazaar of Baghdad also has like a hefty price tag at around 1.5 to 2,000, right?
Yeah.
So
sure.
that's the thing.
And yeah, and City of Traitors also is played like in monocolor deck, so it's like a bit the beyond the dual lands of monocolor deck. So
Mhm.
don't really increase the price.
Okay.
And yeah, and for Candelabra, like yeah, we know that it's a card that is playing the format, that is playing Lear. But right now the format is played also in MTG, so you need to take care about this player too. And if one player play Lear right now and booked his Candelabra to play it, and like 5 months later or 6 months later, we just ban because it's too expensive. It's so dramatic for this person that just bought the cards. And so what is banned right now, I think we will not unban Bazaar of Baghdad or Timetwister because it will be impossible to find it. But like the card that is legal right now, it's not a problem right now. And if a player booked it to play his pet deck like Lear, and we ban it just for this reason, it's just too awful for the person, I think. And we can play with that amount of money. We need to be really careful about decision about this.
Fair enough. So if Bazaar hadn't been banned back then and it was still legal now, it probably wouldn't be banned. Like you wouldn't be thinking about banning it now.
Yeah, we're not banning only for price reason, I think.
Okay.
It's not a good thing.
Fair enough. Yeah,
I'm
thanks for
not
that.
too sure if Timetwister was really only banned for price reasons. It saw some play every now and then. It was connected to Urza because there were some
Yeah,
Urza
but
lists
Urza got
also
banned
using.
in the same ban update.
That is correct.
Well,
That is correct.
For
So
Bazaar of Baghdad, it was playing Asmo, where that was banned at the same time. And
Yeah, right.
it was played in Sloguk a bit and in Riel, that deck that doesn't really exist at this time.
yeah, and also there was Oscar, the Demir deck that would.
Oh yeah,
Right. I'm not sure about the wording anymore of this card, but I think the cost was increased by something in your graveyard. It decreased actually. But yeah, interesting thought here. I was just checking on the Candelabra, and it seems that the price went up quite a bit from 1,000 half a year ago to now almost 2,000 euros. So that's quite a thing, to be honest. Other people play entire decks for 2,000 euros, and that's already expensive, right? Some people
I think
always.
it's a bit played Legacy now.
Yeah, it is. That's why the price is so high right now.
Yeah, in the monocolor on the brown decks like Tron and things like this.
Yeah, I think the printing of the 3 mana Teferi, not Teferi, Tezzeret.
Tezzeret, yeah.
Really pushed that archetype a lot, and
It's
with
the other Zealand, I think. It's because there is new Zealand with as Planar Nexus and Urza Workshop.
And Urza's Tower. Yeah, you suddenly have like you have lands making 4 mana for a tap, and they come into play untapped, and so the Candelabra suddenly is producing a lot of mana.
Yeah.
Especially being able to get untapped with the Tezzeret's 0 ability and that kind of spirals.
The Legacy, the winner of the Legacy Showcase Challenge of yesterday play like 3 Candelabra in this deck. So yeah.
I think a deck like Ral, the Is It Planeswalker Flip Walker, would be quite happy about Timetwister being unbanned. Mm.
Yeah, I guess too. But what I said, it's like we don't want to unban card like this because people don't invest money in that card, and if we unban that, we'll push people to invest too much money in cards. Not too much, but a lot of money in cards, and that we don't really want to urge people to do that. To not push, but that people have to do that to play a pet deck. That's, I think, not worth and not wise to do that. But if the cat is not banned right now, it's legal right now. We don't want to ban it for only this reason.
Yeah, I get that. I get that, but I also think I would say before having Duel Commander on MTGO, this would have been a serious conversation. These days, with MTGO, it's less of a problem. We already see that with Leah because people played. It was quite popular on MTGO because you can play the Candelabra without paying $2,000. And for the paper tournaments, some of those organizers, even the bigger organizers, still allow for 1 or 2 proxies. I know that there are a bunch of communities experimenting with that, having like a definitive rule set on how to enable proxies with like the most competitive environment, so that the proxies always have the same quality and whatsoever, and that they meet some required standards. So in a frame like that, it would be possible to unleash those cards, right?
It's not a role to discuss about proxies. I know from me personally, outside my position about member of Duel Commander, I play tournament with proxy like the European Legacy Masters. That's only proxy, and was so happy to play this tournament. It was the only reason that I can play it. It was because proxy was legal. So cool for the community and for the my leaves, the legacy leaves. And I know there is the French Championship of Modern like in 2 weeks, and also allows proxies. And yeah, it's one of the reasons that I'll go there, because I can play the deck that I want without need to ask people to give me card or a free deck, because I play in every format mostly every format of Magic. So it's my position about proxy, but it's not the role of the Duel Commander committee to discuss about that, because
I get that. And you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to talk about it, but it's something that you can keep in mind. Because personally, I think with like the Eternal cards, especially reserved list cards, getting more and more expensive, because since pre-modern is so popular, Intuition also went up to 500 for the normal copy. The foil copy is almost 2,000 euros. That's about the same price as a City of Traitors, sorry. And we will always have some of those cards with a more or less hefty price tag, apart from being dual lands. So I think the question of allowing proxies in the future will, unless Wizards push out these cards by printing slightly, tweaked versions that are similar powerful, or I wouldn't say more powerful. We've seen a altered version of Gilded Drake with the how's it called? Voldarian Hex Drake? No, it's called differently, but you know what I mean, right? The 3/2 that comes in with hexproof and energy, exactly. Stuff like this. So Wizards is every now and then experimenting in that direction, and some of those cards are suitable for our format. So yeah, I definitely agree. It's not your cup of tea. It's not your business to talk about proxies, but I can see a future where tournament organizers are more and more open for that to happen. Or to allow it.
If tournament organizers take that kind of decision, we can think about unban of this card. But right now, for example, the French championship of Duel Commander doesn't allow it. I don't know how it goes in other big tournament. Like the tournament was organized by Fanfinity, doesn't allow proxy. The Rickfest also doesn't allow proxy. So I think the biggest tournament in Duel Commander doesn't allow that card, and it's more like national event or in smaller event and allows that, like FNM or like medium side event, like 100 player or 60 player. So if this kind of tournament organizer doesn't allow it, we can take decision about with that in view, with the fact that proxy can be played, a player that can play the untenable proxy or a Bazaar of Baghdad or a Timetwister proxy. Because that's not the case on the biggest event.
Yeah.
And it's important to see the top of the pyramid, I think, for this kind of cards.
Yeah, I think the thing about allowing proxies at such big events is just people, in theory, it sounds very easy, but I think the logistical part around that is quite difficult. If you want to have a look at all those cards, because if you have like a given standard for the proxies that you want to check, then you also have to make deck checks and you have to have like manpower for that, right? And that takes time, that takes resources, and it's not easy to fulfill. Whether it's the French nationals or the Czech nationals, or like even a Relic Fest with 1,000 players, it's more or less impossible, to be honest. So
it's a big challenge, and people are not like ready to work like this. So I understand.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I would say that's it for today. We haven't had any other questions. We were asking our community. Most questions were headed towards Spiderman. I think I would expect people to be very happy with these unbans, and yeah, I'm looking forward to a somewhat tweaked metagame within the next weeks or even months. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time, Nicholas. Thanks a lot for coming by and talking about the changes.
Yeah, thanks so much.
With that, I will say goodbye. Thanks a lot, guys, for tuning in. Enjoy the new cards. Show us some fancy brews with Najeela, most likely, I hope. Otherwise, enjoy the good ones, Winota and Emry. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and we will see each other in the next video.
Yeah, see you next time.
Bye-bye.